Welcome back to GMP Scenario, presented by PharmaContentLabs.com.
All right, let's talk about something in the pharmaceutical world, a gap. It's a procedural gap in change control that's so subtle it gets missed all the time. But here's the thing, it's also so critical that it can lead to some really major compliance failures. Today, we're going to put that exact gap right under the microscope.
Okay, so I want you to picture a scene that's probably pretty familiar to a lot of you. You've got the quality assurance team, they're all gathered around, and they're reviewing a proposed change to a manufacturing process. And, on the surface, everything looks like it's in order.
So they start running through their standard checklist, right? Process impact? Yep. Assessed? Check. Equipment impact? Assessed? Check. But then they get to regulatory impact, and there's a pause. That little box, it's empty.
So what's really going on here? You have to understand, this isn't just some simple oversight. No, this is a truly critical piece that's just missing from the whole change control puzzle.
And that really gets us to the key question, doesn't it? Is this just a minor issue, something you can quickly patch up and move on? Or does it point to something way bigger, a fundamental failure in the system? A major compliance gap?
Well, let's be perfectly clear about this. It is a gap. And when we're talking about good manufacturing practices, or GMP, it's a really significant one.
So let's give it a name. We can call this a change control gap. Here's what it is. It's when a change, one that affects a really critical step or a specification or maybe a method parameter, moves forward without a formal regulatory impact assessment. And the most important thing to remember here is that under GMP, that assessment, it isn't optional. It is a mandatory part of the process anytime it's applicable.
Okay, so we've established that this is a pretty big problem, but what are the tangible consequences? What does this actually look like in the real world? Let's dive into the risks.
For starters, it's a direct path to non-compliance. Simple as that. Second, it creates something called filing gaps. And this is a really dangerous situation because it means the process you're actually running in your facility is different from the one that's registered and approved by health authorities. And finally, it basically opens the door to some very pointed, very difficult questions from inspectors.
Just imagine for a second. An inspector is looking you right in the eye and asks, so how did you ensure alignment with your approved dossiers? Trust me, without that documented regulatory assessment, that is an incredibly tough question to answer.
But here's the good news. Closing this gap is actually pretty straightforward. It all comes down to a really clear three-step process that you can build directly into your system.
The whole process really hinges on just 3 key actions. Step 1, you identify if the change touches any registered details. Step 2, you go and consult the specific regulatory requirements for whatever market you're in. And step 3, you thoroughly, and I mean thoroughly, document the regulatory path forward.
So let's zoom in on that first step for a second. When we say registered details, that isn't some vague concept. We're talking about concrete specifics. Things like your critical process parameters, the exact specification limits you filed, even your primary packaging components. You really have to know precisely what's in your dossier before you can even begin to assess the impact of a change.
Okay, and that third step? It is all about creating an audit-proof record. Your documentation has to be crystal clear. It needs to show the assessment itself, what the final decision was, and a direct link to the exact dossier sections that are affected. And this is so important. You have to state the official change classification. Is it a simple notification or a major variation? And hey, if no filing is required, you can't just leave it blank. You absolutely have to document the scientific rationale for that decision.
Now, this brings us to a super critical point of failure, timing. Let me say this as clearly as I can. You cannot implement the change until all required regulatory approvals are secured. That sequence is absolutely non-negotiable. If you get it wrong, you're operating with an unapproved process. It's as plain and simple as that.
All right, now for the final and, maybe the most important piece of this whole puzzle. If you want to know what an inspector is going to zero in on, this is it. This is their number one check. So here's the most common and, believe me, costly mistake that companies make. The myth is that, hey, once the internal quality department signs off, you're good to go. But the reality? The reality is that inspectors always check for alignment between that quality approval and the regulatory assessment. They are looking for that handshake, that connection between the two functions. So if there's one thing you take away from this, it's this. Quality and regulatory have to be in lockstep. A sign-off from quality by itself is just not enough. The record has to show that both functions have reviewed the change and that they are aligned.
That alignment, well, that's the very bedrock of a compliance system.
And that really leaves just one final question for you to take back to your team. I want you to take a really hard look at your own system, at your own procedures. Is your change control process, is it really built to pass this test?
Thank you for watching. If this helped, like and subscribe. More GMP scenarios coming.